I'm going to guess the Boston Bruins are going to add Winnipeg to their no-fly list after what was an absolute piss kicking against the Winnipeg Jets. Let's chat about that on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Now, if you've been sticking with us the last few weeks, I appreciate it. I know listenership has maybe been a little bit up and down thanks to the Jets kind of being up and down as well, right? It's been a rough last stretch of games, but it feels like the Jets, maybe the past couple of outings, have at least shown a little bit more of a spark of life, right? It's been some roller coaster weeks, but thankfully, it kind of feels like the Jets may be starting to turn a corner. And it really started this past week with a couple of wins, but now the Jets have put on a massive performance against the Boston Bruins. Honestly, it was just a complete and utter dismantling of, look, a Bruins team that may not be great, but they are still tough to score against, and the Jets basically just took them out behind the shed and decided, your season's over. We're going to chat about how the Jets pulled this off and what really stood out in what was an 8-1 demolition in just a little bit, but before we go any further, just wanted to let you know that you could start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Now, like I said, the Jets, it's been a rough couple of weeks, and I think Winnipeg was really looking for some kind of a statement signature win. Winnipeg has had a couple of wins over the past couple of games. They beat the Sabres and the Blackhawks. There was a loss to the Blue Jackets sandwiched in between, but, second half of a back-to-back. Obviously, it just wasn't one of those games where Winnipeg really had it, and it's understandable. They've had a lot of travel the last month or so, and I think the road schedule being as brutal as it was definitely caught up. And so Winnipeg, they're finally getting a homestand, and what better way to really kick off the heart of it than by absolutely embarrassing the Bruins. Now, the Bruins have been, a decent team, but not particularly great. If you look at a lot of their wins, there's kind of an interesting pattern that sort of echoes some of Winnipeg's early season wins against teams that were not that great, right? You beat up on the weaker teams, but when you come up against playoff opponents, it's maybe a little bit of a different story. And I think the Jets have certainly experienced their fair share of that on the road this year. But this was a game where you still got to get through Boston, and they tend to be a tight defensive structure. They can be annoying to try and score against, and Winnipeg basically just took them out behind the shed, and like I said, just put them out of their misery. This was a game that just, after the first 10 minutes, suddenly started to fall away. Winnipeg got a couple of early power plays, and from then on, it just felt like the Jets started to take over. Winnipeg obviously hasn't had as many games recently where they're just running things at 5v5, but this was absolutely one of those games. Nemesnikov kind of got things going early with a power play goal. This one was actually, I feel like Chibrikov deserved an assist. He was not, unfortunately, within the last three to touch the puck, and so he just barely missed recording a point there, but he had a nice little patient puck hold that ended up leading to, some deflections and stuff, and Nemesnikov capitalized on a bit of a ping-ponger from Niederreiter, and that was how things started off. And then, the Jets top line, which obviously has been much maligned the past year or two, finally had a game, in recent memory that I think a lot of us can take some joy out of. This top line went ham. Scheifele opened it up with a great goal. Gabriel Velarde drew some attention to himself, and then he had a really important second effort to try and keep the puck inside deep the offensive zone, kind of pushed it back towards Connor. Connor finds Scheifele in the slot, and Mark, whose wrist has definitely been a problem and still even had some niggling moments here that you could kind of see on some of his passes, pounds the puck home and makes it, 2-0. If there was somebody who really needed a 5v5 good quality goal in that slot area, it was Scheifele, just to get that feeling back, right? He's had an empty netter and he's had some points and stuff recently, but I think for the most part, the version of him that we're used to, it's been hard for him to pull that one and summon it to the surface. And tonight was more classic Scheifele. He wasn't done because in the second period he got a really powerful one-time shot off of a great Morrissey almost slot drive, and then a great pass across on the power play. Scheifele had the most frick you power play one-time slapper that I've seen him take. He just vulcanized that puck, and I think he wanted to send it to Pluto. So Scheifele, he seems like he's feeling better. Hopefully the wrist kind of heals up and continues to get better because, you still noticed on some passes things that were maybe going a little bit wider than he'd want, but this was much, much better from him. He looked a lot more engaged. He looked a lot more active, and like he could actually pull off the plays that you are up here. It's just hard to get your body to do that when you're dealing with a pretty serious injury. Thankfully, it didn't really seem to stop him from setting up Connor later in the third. KFC had his goal, then Velarde had a great one later, and the Jets just kept piling it on from then on. Iafallo had a power play goal. This one was Chibrikov's first assist in his career, just the second game. And then Appleton and then Chibrikov also got in on the action. And, just a really crazy, fun night. I think that this is just one of those games that puts a smile on your face, right? It's not been often that Winnipeg really just completely embarrasses an opponent like this, but the Jets basically sent Boston back to the AHL. This was, from a top to bottom perspective, a complete and utter annihilation. It was great. I think the Jets, more than most other teams, really needed this, and it's really funny because the Jets are the first team to 20 wins, but you look at their recent streak and you could kind of feel like things were starting to fall to the wayside. This is one of those games where you get that confidence back, you get that feeling back. Hellebuck was great in net. The Jets, up and down the lineup, really had about as outstanding a night as you could possibly ask for. There really weren't many things of concern. Maybe DeMelo is looking to be a bit of a problem, and you notice he's a talking point for later. But otherwise, you're just pretty happy about this game. Stanley did have, some of his moments with Heinola that were not so great, but, he also generally did enough to stay out of trouble. And I think in some scenarios, that's probably the most that you want to ask of him at this point. Just keep it clean. If there's somebody I really want to shout out, though, aside from the top line, Cole Perfetti really deserves roses for this game. He was super, super aggressive, very physical. And honestly, he was just doing so much of the dirty work and forechecking, and then even drew a penalty. He had an assist on Chibrikov's goal and was just a menace in the corners and stuff, which I think a lot of people have often written off. I don't know if people realize how much he's willing to grind along the walls, but Perfetti is a guy who just goes into the spaces and corners and tries to make them his. He is a phenomenal player. Even when he's not scoring, I think his presence has been a lot more noticeable this year, and he's really not afraid to go up against opposing top players and really pressure them, right? So just great to see him work very hard. And of course, you're also going to see that we do have some time set aside to talk about Chibrikov in his second NHL game, the first of this season, because quite honestly, he deserves a little bit of standout for attention for his performance in what was, obviously a pretty one-sided game, but still one where a guy like him could find a way to stand out. We'll chat about his performance and what stands out and maybe what he might continue to bring to this Jets team in the future in just a little bit. Before we go any further, though, just wanted to let you know about our friends and partners at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. If you're thinking about the weekend, obviously the Ravens have a pretty favorable matchup. I'm planning to watch that game, and I expect it to be a pretty good win. If you're a Vikings fan, maybe you're thinking that this year's defense is going to lead to a deep playoff run. And you know what? If you're watching the game, be sure to check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you're placing your bets, which you can only do at FanDuel.com. Again, if you win your first $5 bet, you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's all at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Folks, thanks for hanging around as we are chatting about Winnipeg versus Boston, and it's time to chat about our young rookie, Nikita Chibrikov. And you've heard me talk about Chibrikov in the past, whether it was this season or last. I have a lot of hype around this kid. Chibrikov, in his first North American season, was really good for the Moose. Clearly a top scorer, definitely had some defensive issues to work out, but on the whole, for his first year in the A, it was very impressive. And it kind of continues this trend from his Russia days where he's a nasty little forechecker with a great shot. I guess if you have like a comparison stylistically, maybe there's some Stankoven in his game, maybe a little bit of Marchand in the corners, just some stylistic stuff that I think is helpful for him, right? He's not the biggest of players, but he's very physical. He's not afraid to mix it up in the corners, and he's got a relentless engine to try and create offense, which I think for this Jets team and the way that they're drafting, they're really starting to identify a type. If you look at Kevin He, I think that's a great example. Chibrikov kind of also fits this mold, and so I can kind of see where the Jets are going with this. And listen, I don't hate it. I like that style. I think it's something that's upbeat and up tempo and might fit the Jets, even if it doesn't necessarily lead to like loads of scoring at the NHL level. This archetype of player is something I'm very much about. But I think Chibrikov has real potential to be a little bit more impactful with that release of his. And we got to see it in this game, right? His first NHL game, he whipped one by, I don't even remember who was in net for Vancouver last year. Maybe it was Demko or somebody else. But you saw that super tight angle that he went far post. And tonight, this one came off of a forced forecheck / turnover thing from Perfetti, where he made a Boston player make a mistake. Puck pops right out. Chibrikov recognizes it immediately, spins and turns, and just absolutely roofs this one past Swayman. And it was just a nasty, almost like snapshot, beautiful release, perfect goal. And it's why I've really been intrigued to see what he can do at the NHL level. I felt like in preseason and camp, he was probably far and away the most NHL ready skater that the Jets had playing in these preseason games. Among the prospect ranks, I feel like his rise has been among the fastest. And it's interesting that nationally he doesn't get that much attention. I don't know why that is, but in terms of players with, a surprising amount of room to grow in their ceiling, I think Chibrikov for me is one of the most intriguing players and somebody who could very quickly become a fan favorite. Now, I don't know exactly what his true potential is. He's a very interesting player with a couple of perhaps stylistic or maybe even skill things that he's going to have to work on. And again, these are probably more in the details, but you saw how good he was with the puck. You saw that he was very active and engaged. He skates well. Again, he's fearless in the corners, an absolute pest. And not only did he get a goal, he also had an assist on the power play. So in my mind, I just feel like there's a lot to like. He actually could have had another assist had, he been the third guy to have that contact on the earlier power play. But overall, just a really good game from him. I thought he was consistently engaged throughout. I thought he was very active and trying to force turnovers. And, he'll constantly hug the puck carrier. And he even drew a penalty or two, which I think is great. And so just overall, you really couldn't ask for a more complete game. And I think it's why when I saw him in camp, he was, for me, the guy who should have been called up first. Honestly, I thought he should have just made the Jets, period. I know that Winnipeg's roster situation right now is a little complicated, and that's why he didn't make it. But I think if the Jets can figure out a way to get him into this lineup, especially in a middle six role, I think Winnipeg will get paid dividends for his performance. He looked great. I was really impressed. It kind of reminded me a lot of what he did last year, and it's nice to see him just pick up where he left off. Not to really disparage Lambert, but I think Brad is just a little further off. Lambert still has a couple of things that he needs to work on. Whereas Chibrikov, to me, felt more like a plug-and-play kind of guy. Now, that does come with some expectation that I think, in my mind, Chibrikov maybe has a lower offensive potential than Lambert does. Not because he's not going to be a really good scorer or anything, but I just think Lambert has an extra layer of skating and creativity that very few talents of his caliber possess. And so I think Brad may take a little more time to get there, but I think he has truly special talent. Where with Chibrikov, I think he's just going to be a really good middle six player. And there is the potential that he, maybe moves a little bit higher than that, maybe like fringe second liner. It's not really out of the question. And I think tonight's performance, definitely shows that he's got real spunk, he's got real skill, and he has a release that I think is already NHL caliber, which, having seen it before, not my first time, I already knew that he could score at this level. I think the biggest question is just how often will he do it? Is he going to find those soft areas? In some ways, maybe he compares a little favorably to the way that Perreault attacks the goal mouth area, some of the space around, the crease. He'll constantly look to create, shifty little angles there. He'll try to put one past the goalie, maybe moving laterally quickly. And he actually did try something is sort of akin to the Gabriel Velarde power play patented goal line move. Didn't end up working, but the fact that he's able to get those shots off really close in tight and very quickly is always encouraging. So for his second game, already 3 points, just 2 games into his NHL career, and he looks to be a guy who's an NHLer. Again, you could maybe have some question as to what level of NHLer he'll eventually finish as, but so far, so good. Really impressed with him. Thought his effort was great throughout the night, and I think, he probably will get sent back down, but if there's a way to keep him up, I really think Winnipeg would benefit from his goal contributions. The Moose would probably agree. They are certainly missing him tonight. Last I saw, they were losing like 3-0 to the Wranglers. Don't know if that's changed, but what a first game for him. Really impressive. And you just have to like this one, right? And I think, the Jets having such a dominant performance only made it easier for him to sort of get up to speed, to feel comfortable at this level, and to put on, his level of quality performance. If he does kind of stick around with Perfetti, I'm curious to know what they do together. Perfetti, in many ways, I thought in this game really showcased that forechecking ability and skill, and alongside somebody like Chibrikov, who's also kind of a similar archetype, but a little more energetic and faster into it, and maybe more of a clinical finisher, it could be an interesting pairing to investigate down the road. So lots to like. I think Chibrikov had a great first game. He'll stick around for a couple of games because Ehlers is not yet skating. I think he did have his own individual skate, but in terms of practice and stuff, he's not ready for that. He was just on the ice earlier for a self skate, but nothing too serious, right? So Chibrikov has the chance to maybe play 3-4 games. I think that they're going to do something similar to what they did with Brad. You don't need to rush Ehlers back necessarily. You've got him on 7 to 10 day IR, I believe, and so. For the Jets, this is a great audition period, and if anything is to go by from Chibrikov's second game, there is a lot ahead in store for Jets fans and for Nikita. In other prospect news, just a real brief thing that I thought is probably worth shouting out. Elias Salomonsson is actually expected to miss 3 weeks total or something along those lines. That is much better than initially feared. A lot of us were concerned that it was going to be a broken collarbone or something that was really serious. The way that he was holding his arm in that one game, again, if you haven't seen the footage, don't look it up. It wasn't good. He was letting it dangle. It looked bad. It was a rough hit in the corners. Not intentionally bad, but, just the end result was rough. And you could tell that he was in extraordinary amounts of pain. And so just very good to hear that it wasn't as serious as the team initially thought, maybe in early January. So very happy. But yeah, it just feels like the kids are starting to really find their way. All that's going to happen is that you get Lucius up and running, you get Lambert going, and I think things are going to start falling into place. The Jets are in an interesting point now where theoretically, like I mentioned on the last episode, you could have up to 3 or 4 rookies really helping you out in the postseason run. I'm curious to know what that looks like, and if, Lucius and Lambert make the cut. Chibrikov, I think, should definitely be in that group, but Chaz and Brad do have an opportunity to maybe lock in a Black Aces squad kind of spot. So something to keep an eye out for. Salomonsson, I think, was also a lot further along than I expected, but I did think he would adapt to North America quickly. So in that respect, he is living up to my own personal hopes and dreams, but maybe a little bit better than I think any of us would have anticipated initially. So if there's anything to take away from this, it's that the kids are feeling pretty all right. Even if it's not always reflecting with the Moose, it seems like in general, Winnipeg's youth is having a pretty good time. And actually, I think on tomorrow's episode, I want to spend some time talking about a couple of particular youth who have really stood out recently. The Jets are getting some great contributions from their depth picks, and listen, man, I'm really excited about guys like Kieran Walton and players of that nature. And again, maybe they're a little further out, but I think the Jets feel like they are getting closer and closer to something really fun, and that is that's all you can ask for, right? Is to watch a really fun team with skill and speed, and I think the Jets are continuing to add more of that as time goes on, and hopefully Chibrikov becomes a key piece of that future and Winnipeg's present, right? That would be awesome, but of course, with all of the happiness and joy, every now and then you do have to kind of address a topic that's a little bit concerning, and one of them is going to be Dylan DeMelo. DeMelo he is just going through it right now, and I don't know what's wrong with him. We'll chat about that in just a brief moment and sort of another situation that it reminds me of. But before we go too much further, just wanted to let you know about our friends and partners at Prize Picks. If you love sports, you're going to love Prize Picks, the best place to turn your sports knowledge into real money. Whether it's hockey, football, or any of your favorite sports, Prize Picks makes it easy to get in on the action. If you're trying to get started right now, you can win up to 200 times your money with Prize Picks, and you'll get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. No need to win. The $50 is guaranteed. Prize Picks also offers fun weekly promotions like Taco Tuesday, where select player projections are discounted up to 25%. Now, last episode I said something about the top line, probably over 2 points, and I think that's already held. They combined for 8 points in this game. So I think if you're locking in that prediction for the rest of the week, that's probably a pretty safe bet. Whether it's Scheifele, Connor, Velarde, they are already primed for a great run for the rest of this week's games. But the only way that you can get in on the action is to download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 instantly. Prize Picks. Run your game. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are just chatting about some good from the Jets, a lot of good in this particular game against the Bruins, but maybe something that's been a trend that's a little worrying and certainly not a new phenomenon this season. Dylan DeMelo is having one of the worst years that I've seen from him. And if you look at a lot of the underlying metrics and stuff and some of the microstats tracking, not much immediately stands out about his profile that's identifiable just from looking at his stats readout. You could maybe look at the expected goal share and some of the danger chances, the quality of chances against that have maybe ticked up a bit. But you're looking at the breakout passes and stuff, failed exits and things like that. And nothing inherently looks bad, but when you watch him, you're seeing where a lot of the concern is coming from. One of the things that has really stood out to me this year is how often he's handling the puck like a hand grenade. It seems like the coordination is just not there. And what it really reminds me of is Blake Wheeler. It makes me wonder if Wheeler's herniated disc and maybe age-related decline had, that double-fisted impact on his ability to cleanly handle the puck and make passes. And if that's happening to DeMelo, something similar where an injury plus age is really hurting him, you're going to have to pull him off the first pairing. I love DeMelo, and I think that there's a version of him that's going to improve at some point this year, but I'd be lying if I said I'm not concerned about the dip and play. He has been among our worst defenders this year, and it's really out of character for him. He usually doesn't struggle with this stuff. Even basic passes under pressure, he's usually been really good at. He's a zone exit expert, and so to see him struggle this much with basic reads or easy-ish passes, relatively speaking, at least by his standards, it's just troubling. I've never really seen him have this many struggles this consistently. And it kind of started late last year to where I thought, okay, maybe it's just a temporary setback, nothing to be too concerned about, but it's getting to be the point where it's gone on for long enough. And I'm thinking, maybe this is just who he is now. And if that's the case, the Jets are going to have to really figure out something for that right side, because DeMelo playing like this going forward at his cap hit is really not great for business. Again, when his initial extension was signed, I was like, maybe skeptical, but I thought he'd still be good. I just thought, I wasn't too worried about the decline necessarily. I thought it was just a temporary blip. I wasn't reading into it as much more than a brief setback, but it's starting to show some real sustained trends, and I think that's not great for the Jets. Morrissey kind of needs that anchor partner on the right side, and if he doesn't have it, what did the Jets even do, right? Could you trade for somebody? Maybe. You could ask Salamonson to try and fill in. Not a very good plan in my mind. And I like Salamonson. I think he's very good, but, his first AHL season, really, and you want to ask him to come up to the big club and try and step in there? Probably not. You could ask Pionk to do it, and you already know my thoughts on that. Probably not. Miller could maybe do it, but Colin has his own quirks and things that I think he's still figuring out. And, at this stage, he's a shoot first kind of guy, which maybe doesn't mesh as well with Morrissey. I'd still be willing to try it out, at least just to see what happens, because Morrissey DeMelo has definitely struggled. And, given how important Morrissey is to this team, you really don't want to have him with a partner that's equally having some major issues. So, yeah, the Jets don't have a lot of options there, but the positive spin is that DeMelo has usually pulled himself out of bad stretches before, and maybe that's going to happen again. I just don't know if that's going to happen this time. And so Winnipeg really needs to start thinking about the future. The right side is, it's got some decent prospects, and I think that there's some real reason to believe that the Jets could do something there, maybe in a trade. But if they're not willing to pay up for a big asset, your options start to trail off really quickly. But the Jets have usually worked well around some of this stuff. It's just the defense where I feel like some of the decision-making in the past hasn't really been ideal. But, maybe Chevy will see it. Maybe he'll kind of agree with this assessment, and he'll want to bring in some kind of a big right-sided D. Rasmus Andersson would be amazing. With the Flames in the current situation that they are, I'm not sure if they're actually shopping him, but I would 100% be down for that. If you're making a big power play and you're willing to pay up a big prospect and pick package, a guy like Anderson is absolutely the kind of quality of player that you really should be targeting. He's a needle mover. He'd be amazing for this team. And, that's the sort of caliber that I'd hope the Jets would be after. Now, they don't usually do this. In fact, it's pretty rare unless somebody's really disgruntled. So not really expecting it, but it is always nice to dream about it at some point. But I guess internally, I'm just really hoping that DeMelo can find his form again. He is really valuable when he's playing good hockey. And, just on a personal level, I like him. He's a really funny guy. He's a big locker room leader. And if there's a player that you consistently root for, DeMelo's pretty easy to do so, right? He's likable. He's a good leader. I always feel like he's accountable. And so seeing him struggle like this has been really tough. Not that you ever want to see any Jet struggle, but in particular, it just sucks to see some of your favorites like DeMelo having a real down period. And I think he'd probably say himself that things have not come as easy to him as they did in previous years. So cross your fingers that it's just temporary and that it's not going to last forever. Our many child king has done a great job in his career. And, I'm just hoping that this is a short temporary setback and that he'll get back to his best pretty soon. But thankfully, the Jets have plenty of players who can step up in his stead in the meantime, and step up they have in some critical moments. So happy for that. But of course, I don't want to, dwell too long on this and get the vibes down, especially after an 8-1 victory over Boston. Great game. Later this week, the Jets will face Vegas, and we'll have some preview coverage ahead of that on tomorrow's episode. But for tonight's show, at least that's going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for hanging around and listening to Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great night, and go Jets go.